these tips. This is the top 3 frosted tips. And so I apologize for that. It's
Oh my gracious, the
my
90s.
fault.
Wow.
Yeah, I apologize. So
Is that
rest in
the
peace.
guy from Sugar Ray right
It
there?
is. Rest in peace, Mark McGrath. That's right. Yeah, he was
Gosh,
amazing. Yeah, yeah.
I
Every
just want
morning
to
there's a
fly, I
halo
guess.
hanging from the corner of my girlfriend's 4-post bed, right? So, all
I want
right.
to fly past this screen. That's what I want to do. All
Yeah,
right.
me too. Me too. We're moving on, y'all. Moving on. All right. So our 3 big tips are find your voice. And Beth, I don't know, did you see the email I sent you today, Beth, with the video?
Yes.
If you haven't had a chance to watch it, but I mean, when I was reading your tip, I was like, oh, I've got to find this clip, and I finally found it, and I love that. But Beth's going to talk with us about that and how it's so important. Uh, you know, we sometimes talk about academic writing as in a way being voiceless or sterile. And what we're learning is that the most effective academic writing is that which has a good voice. And the most effective arguments are that which have a strong voice that helps support it. So then Tim's going to talk about an extension of that in a way, focusing on language with cause and effect. And then my favorite thing is to talk about complexity and tensions. So um, with that, I'll hand it over to Beth. And Beth, you just tell me when you're ready for me to click.
Okay, go ahead.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about helping students to find their voice. And this is something that I've been talking to my students about probably since we came back from winter break in January. Though if you're in the South, you might have had what we had, which was like a 5-day hiatus because we got like 3 inches of snow in Arkansas. So everything shut down for like 5 days. So we've been talking about how to find your voice. And this is something that would apply to each of the FRQs, whether it's rhetorical analysis or argument or synthesis. It might look a little different depending on the task. And so one of the things that I told my students recently is that, hey, writers make rhetorical choices, and they're like, okay, got it. We've established that. And then I was like, but you're writers, when you write essays, and therefore you should make rhetorical choices. And you could see that for some of them, they were kind of having this moment of like, oh, wait, yes, I can do this. Because I think sometimes students assume that when we're talking about writers, we're talking about like famous people and authors or famous orators or something. But in actuality, they're writers too. As students, they're writing an essay. They have a purpose behind their writing. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is just how can we teach them to start making the choices that they're studying in class? And how do we do that in a way that is approachable for students from a variety of skill sets? That way they can work toward more sophisticated essays. So not that we're guaranteeing the sophistication point or anything here, but just that we want to teach them to find their voice.
Yeah, not that we're guaranteeing the sophistication point. In the fine print there. But yeah, absolutely. We want them to recognize that their voice matters. So.
Okay, so the first thing that I do with my students is we work on eliminating weak words, or like I try to say lower level because I think that's a little nicer, but basically the 4 that I see the most that kind of creep into my students' writing are good, bad, thing, and a lot.
Now, Beth, can I add one to that I've been
Yes.
hearing an awful lot? Bruh. Okay.
Are you seeing that in essays?
BRUH. Oh my, everywhere. I hear it, I see it, and it's like, oh my gosh, getting that slang out of there. It's just so ridiculous. But anyway, sorry, I cut you off. My bad.
That's funny. I haven't seen that one yet, but it's probably coming. And yeah, Sarah in the chat said stuff. That one comes up a lot as well. And so one of the things that I have my students do is we look for these words. We try to find appropriate synonyms because it's not always a one size fit all. And I'm sure if we brainstormed in the chat, we could come up with others. But these are words that we want students to be able to, like find a synonym, or if we want to make it a little bit more colloquial, we could say, give it a glow up. Honestly, sometimes I'm impressed when my students actually write a lot as 2 words instead of just 1. But yeah, we want to make sure that they're avoiding those lower level words. That's kind of step 1 for my students.
So let me ask you a question, Beth. I've noticed that because I used to do a lot of this. I still do it, but I noted I had to back up myself because I was telling this ahead of time, and it was stifling a lot of kids. So I would then tell them to, early in the year, I wouldn't tell them. I would push it in revision.
Yes.
And then as we get closer to the exam, I say, okay, now you've got to start doing this. You know how to not do this. As you get closer to the exam, you've got to start doing it first time around. Is that how you approach it too?
Yes, because honestly, when they're doing a timed write or even just an in-class assignment, I want them to focus on the content. And then once they are able to revise in some way, or they're just double checking it before they submit, that's when I want them to kind of look for those words as best they can. Because I feel like if they focus on it too much in the moment, it stops the progress. And so it's more of a revision exercise. Yes.
Nice, nice. And did you see, I just got a shout out, Susan Van Theo here and I probably butchered your last name, Suzanne, sorry. But the whole rest in peace bulletin board for words that she
Yes.
does.
The
Yes.
graveyard.
I like it.
Yes.
I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
And I love that they have to
So,
create the epitaph for that too. That
yeah,
rocks. Okay.
yeah. Are they
Beth,
allowed to use the word in the epitaph? Maybe I shouldn't ask, but okay.
Beth, I just want to
Great.
toss something here, right? Based on what you're saying, I just tossed a link in, and it's one of the many of the variations. But the link there actually gets to a chart that has words like happy and sad and those kind of emotional words in there. And it has a chart that goes out, and it's like, okay, well, if you are afraid, well, are you actually insecure? Do you feel weak? Do you feel rejected? And it kind of goes out on tiers. So just to as a resource for what you're saying, I just posted something in the chat. Wanted to make sure you
Yeah,
knew what
it's
that
that
was.
old
That's all.
school tone words list
Yeah,
Yes.
that lives in cyberspace.
that's right.
So it's
That's
very
right.
cool.
But it's actually correlated so that the next tier words are associated with the simplistic ones that you're talking about. So
Yeah.
part of my interruption there, Beth. Super sorry.
No, you're good. Actually, before we move on to the next part, it reminded me of, I didn't make a slide for this, but also lower level verbs like says, shows, uses. I know lots of teachers try to incorporate other ones. I have like a word wall in my classroom. It's mostly because I don't decorate. And so I just leave the word wall up all year. But I have like different verbs that my students can use instead. And so again, it's a way for them to start to experiment with higher level vocabulary and just kind of get away from those words that they maybe say in a moment of, trying to find the right word. They just naturally go to says, shows, or uses. So we want to try to incorporate stronger ones as well. And I'll kind of put those in my assignment instructions sometimes. Like, I want you to try to use emphasizes or underscores or highlights. And so as the year goes on, they get quite comfortable with those words as well.
And to what Jackie just said in the chat, Tim, I was going to point it out to you, and you've already responded. But yeah, Jackie, I say the exact same thing Tim says. A student brings it to me and I look at it, or if if it's a thesis statement and I'm approving it before they write their essay early on in the course, I'm saying, nope, not yet. You can't write your essay yet. You got to fix it. You know what to do. We've talked about it. You've done it before. Go do it. And just builds that habit. But it also keeps me from having to doing those checks ahead of time keeps me from having to get to the final essay and look at it and be like, oh, no, I got to take points off. I don't like doing that. It's about learning, not assessing. So Tim's advice is great. And to pile on what Beth said, with to be verbs, one of my favorite lessons to do with kids to work on trying to get them to see active versus passive voice is to say, wherever there's a to be verb, there's probably another word around it that wants to be the verb. And so how do we find that am, is, are, was, were, be, being, been? How do we find that? And I don't worry about helping verbs. That's a different thing. But and I love that I'm in a room full of people. When I say I don't worry about helping verbs, they all just shake their head. They're like, yep, we know. But there's another word usually around that am or is or are that wants to be the verb. We're just going to have to rearrange the sentence. But that's always in revision. So, all right, if we could just stay on Beth's one tip the whole time, but we got to move on. So let's go ahead here, Beth. Sorry.
No problem. So the next tip that's part of this, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more advanced, is to add in adjectives and adverbs because it makes writing more precise. So I just gave a couple examples here where you could just kind of take the verb that the student is already using and have them add an adverb to make it more precise. And again, this can be done in the revision process or in shorter assignments, but I find that it helps students really think about perhaps like tone or purpose or intent, things like that. One of the things that I started doing, I think last year, I don't know, all the years kind of blur together at this point, but I started having students kind of highlight in certain assignments when they are trying to do this. That way I can know, okay, this is the student trying to incorporate more advanced vocabulary or more adverbs. That way I can kind of give them that feedback on, are you using it correctly? Does it make sense here? Things like that. So just kind of like little check-ins along the way helps. And then the more they do this in like a small scale, the more likely I've seen it happen in their writing as well.
Well,
Like
think
when they
about
do
that
like a
too,
time
Beth.
test.
Think about
Yeah.
that too. When you're making them highlight it or circle it, that means that they've purposely made that choice that they're trying to now push out to you. And if the whole point of developing the voice is to get kids to realize that they're making rhetorical choices as they're engaging with you as their teacher, just having that small moment where it's just a highlighter or it's just a circle or a star, that's them, subliminally recognizing I have made a purposeful choice. I think it's a great idea. I love it. Love it. And I don't do that. And so now I'm just like, I can't wait to.
Yeah, absolutely. The highlighting really helps.
Great.
Okay, so I think actually the next tip goes with like